Hello and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and welcome to the show. Today we're going to cover the 1983 classic King of Comedy by Martin Scorsese, starring Robert De Niro. This is something that we've been discussing ever since we talked about network and parasocial relationships, the role of media, loneliness, mental illness, and the validating effects that the media can have in giving voice to fantasists. Something we really broke ground in a network, and something we're going to cover in this episode by looking at the King of Comedy, and next week's episodes where we look at the 2018 film The Joke by Todd Phillips. But before we get any further, as always, please like, subscribe, share, comment. We always want to know what you're thinking. Hey, Randall, what's a decent way to reach us?
Well, check out our website, chrisandrandall.com. And, you can leave a comment on our Facebook page, Arts Entertainment with Chris and Randall.
Excellent. We really want to hear what you have to say. And before I say anything else, hey, Randall, am I crooked?
No, you're straight right now.
All right, I'm straight. I looked at myself in the monitor for a second, and I just didn't tell if I was visually crooked, not morally crooked. No, that's a wonderful segue into today's episode. So, just a little bit of backstory. A year ago, we covered Patty Chayefsky's. I was the one who wrote it. I can't remember the director now. We covered the movie Network, which came out in 1976, which was filmed in New York City, which was about the rise of network television, the impact of it. The titular character has a nervous breakdown on TV, and by doing so becomes this Masonic leader until he's assassinated. Congratulations, I've just actually now spoiled Network for you. So, moving forward, here's the deal. If you haven't seen the movie King of Comedy, at some point, we are going to talk about the plot. At which point, if you don't want any spoilers, we'll let you know, and then you can get off the bus. But we're going to try to keep it up until a point relatively spoiler-free, meaning we're just not going to give away the ending, but we'll give away pretty much the key point of the film. So, King of Comedy, it was filmed in 1981, but it was released in 1983 because there was a strike. It's the fifth film collaboration between Martin Scorsese and Robert De Niro. It is about a man named Rupert Pupkin who lives at home with his mom, who is an aspiring stand-up comic, who is in awe of a late-night talk show host named Jerry Langford, and wants to be on the Jerry Langford show because he believes that he will be discovered and he will become his own host and he will become the king of comedy, a very big guy. And he's a delusional fellow who gets an opportunity to meet Jerry and think that he has an in with Jerry, and then he will go to extraordinary lengths to become to get on the show. We'll get into further depth about the plot in a bit, but it's interesting. I was 15 when the movie was filmed, which is important, and I was 17 when the film came out. And it is not, I would say, a comedy. It's a dark comedy, I guess, is how you would say that, Randall?
Yeah, it's a dark comedy. I haven't seen it in a while. I think that I watched it yesterday. I think that it was a lot funnier than I remember the first time. I mean, especially now that we have a greater awareness, or I do, of parasocial relationships, the concept, it makes the movie much funnier. I mean,
absolutely. And we're going to go into that in just a moment. We'll just talk about the backstory first. So it was written by a screenwriter named Paul Zimmerman. And it was based on, it was an episode of the David Susskind show, which covered celebrity stalkers. And then there was an article in Esquire about someone who was a stalker of The Tonight Show. And De Niro was actually the one who bought the script. He thought it was really fascinating. And originally Michael Cimino was going to direct it. Michael Cimino would go on to direct Heaven's Gate instead. Martin Scorsese had just directed Raging Bull with De Niro, and it felt like he was exhausted physically and emotionally, and he didn't want to make movies anymore. He just wanted to do documentaries. And De
I just
Niro really leaned in on him to make this movie. Uh,
Yeah, De Niro was fascinated by the concept, but I just want to say that it is about stalkers, but it's I think it's more specifically about autograph hunters. Like
we'll get it. Yeah,
I think that's what the inspiration was. There was some article, I think it's on
yeah.
IMDb's trivia page. There's some article about autograph hunters. Yeah, there was the autograph hunters interview. See, I just want to say, like, if you're really young, there used to be this thing where like people would get like an autograph book. Publishers used to have like autograph books. It would be like this book of blank sheets, and it would say autographs on the front. And then you'd go out and you'd try to like find celebrities to sign it, and it was like a whole thing.
Did
My
you ever
mother.
have an autograph book?
I never had one, but my mother, she got an Elvis Presley's autograph one
Oh
time. She
wow.
was in Vegas, and they were at the same show. They're in the audience. She just got it on a postcard. But no, I growing up, I knew people that had autograph books, and it was funny because most people would get an autograph book, and then you would never get an autograph.
I got an autograph
Never.
book as a child, never got an autograph. I will say, when you see a Broadway play, and I've done this, people will wait outside the artist booth after the play's over, and the actors will come out and they will autograph your playbill.
Right. Right.
Uh,
Well, that's what Pupkin in this movie, Rupert Pupkin and his Sandra Bernhard's character. That's what they're doing in this movie.
yeah, and we're gonna get
They're
into it.
waiting outside of they're waiting outside of the show,
Right,
Langford
and
show, Jerry Langford show, every night, like just to get a glimpse of it.
it's interesting because De Niro, who's a method actor, did a lot of research. He actually started stalking his own stalkers and autograph seekers. He ended up going to dinner with one of his autograph seekers because he wanted to understand the psychology of these people. You
Right.
know,
He said he asked one of them, according to IMDb's trivia page, anyway, he asked one of them what do you want?
yeah,
And they said, I just want to have dinner with you and have some drinks with you.
yeah. And it's interesting because you have to understand something about Robert De Niro. Robert De Niro is not a Hollywood actor. Robert De Niro lives in New York City. Was from New York City, born in New York City. New York's, and I will say this much, and I think it's something that makes this film much more of a New York movie than a LA movie. By the way, this movie is a New York movie and not an LA movie, only because uh, at the time of filming, the Directors Guild was about to go on strike, and they thought it would be easier and simpler, Aaron Mitchelson as producer, to make this movie in New York, shoot it quickly, and there would be less union interference. So technically, the story really should have been filmed in Los Angeles. At the time that they made this show, all the late night talk shows in 1981, there was no Letterman or any of that. It was just Carson, the Mike Douglas show, and Merv Griffin. They were all at that point filmed in Los Angeles. Johnny Carson used to be filmed in New York, but he had long ago left back in the late 60s. So it is interesting that De Niro is a guy who does wander around New York City to this day without, sunglasses, without a fake wig. He lives in the public eye very comfortably, as many famous people do who live in New York City.
Right.
So
And they asked Johnny Carson to play the Jerry Lewis, Jerry Langford role, and Carson didn't want to do it. On IMDb's trivia page, it says something like Carson's like, I'm just a one take guy, so I don't want to do it.
and it's actually kind of amusing because when we get to the Jerry Langford show, which is clearly based on the Tonight Show, and I'll get into that in just a sec. So they used a real TV studio on 81st and Broadway to film the Jerry Langford show. The Jerry Langford show is the Tonight Show that Rupert Pupkin is trying to get in on, and they used a real TV studio that back in the day was the original TV studio for Sesame Street and Electric Company. And you know how I know this, Randall?
How do you know?
Because I lived literally 2 blocks from there. I lived on 81st and West Ave. That's how I knew. And I remember vividly when I first saw the way they decorated the outside of the studio, I thought that the Jerry Langford show was a real show because it looked like it was going to be a real show. And it was surprising to me that it was like a Hirschfeld drawing of someone who looked very similar to Jerry Lewis. But I simply assumed it was, in fact, a talk show. And then when they were filming it, the outdoor scene with all of the autograph seekers, they use these giant Klieg lights to light up the scene. Well, the way that that block works, the light literally traveled down the block into my mother's bedroom, cutting my mother's bedroom in half. So one part of my mom's bedroom was pitch black, and the other one looked like brand new day.
So you witnessed this movie being made back when you were
Yes,
15.
Yes, I did, and I'll never forget the way the light just cut the bedroom. But what I wanted to say was back to Carson is Carson's executive producer, the man who was really very important in shaping the Tonight Show and had been with him really for the entirety of his career, is a guy named Fred DeCordova. And Fred DeCordova plays Jerry Langford's executive producer in the movie. Did you notice?
Yeah, I didn't notice, but I did read it on like the IMDb
Yeah, so
page.
Fred DeCorvita is basically playing Fred DeCorvita.
Right. And Jerry Lewis said he's playing himself too. Like he was complimented years later for his role, and he said, "I was just playing myself." And all the
what
actors.
I know with people who've had dealings with Jerry Lewis, that's not a compliment.
Well,
I know a number of people who've really dealt with the mean Jerry Lewis. So,
all the actors. Yeah, well, all the actors brought something to their performance from their real life because they all used to. Well, both De Niro and Lewis, they are very. They're used to like these parasocial interactions with their fans.
Yeah.
So they brought something. Yeah, but I just want to say
and
about
even on the talk show, I just want to get that point while we're at it, is that they actually use real celebrities to play themselves. So Dr. Joyce Brothers, who was a constant on talk shows back in the day, plays Dr. Joyce Brothers. Tony Randall plays Tony Randall, guest hosting as Tony Randall.
Right.
And by the way, in a neat little nod, the director of the episode that he's complaining to is played by Martin Scorsese.
Right. Yeah. And
so he says, "You're the director. You take care of this," which on two different levels is what Tony Randall means. Even people like Ed Hurley, the announcer, was an old-time NBC radio announcer. So there's a lot of actual people from that world, which now we've gotten very used to. But
during that era, even today,
using real people to play themselves was still a relatively new concept.
Yeah, and during that era, like today, there were like certain fixtures on these talk shows, and so they brought some of those people in to like give it more an air of realism, you could say.
Yeah. So that it really had the feel and the look of what. And I guess now, Randall, this is more your. Am I right in assuming, it's been a long time, that they're using some video in the film?
Yeah, I think I read, I don't know where I read it now, maybe on Wikipedia, but they, for the TV stuff, they shot it on film and then they transferred it to VHS and then put it back on film. So what you're seeing is what actual videotape looks like. Now, I'm sure they're using like high-end videotape, like U-Matic 3-inch or something, not like the old home VHS. But yeah, it's the effect they're getting. It's not like a computer generated effect. It's like the actual you're seeing actual video, what it would have looked like on TV back in the olden days.
Which is a lot more interesting than, Network, which is even the non-TV scenes in Network are lit high key like
didn't
television.
They shoot Network on 16 millimeter? Was that, if I'm remembering right? So I mean, there was some TV that was shot on 16 millimeter, but yeah, when you watch Network and you watch the TV footage, technically it's not. It's not like as close, I think, to what you'd actually get, because I think a lot of TV, even if they shot it on film, at some point they transfer it to video. For distribution, for syndication, for the stations to rerun and stuff. And so I mean, it's, TV is kind of a mess, technically speaking, now that we're off on a tangent here. But, I mean, if something was live, it probably would have looked a lot better. And of course, you're never going to see that again. You're only going to see it live. And then when you see the recording of it, it's gonna have been transferred to probably a videotape format. So
It's
what
just,
like what you see in King of Comedy.
yeah, it's just very interesting because this visual choice, whether by intention or default, really makes the world of television and the TV set its own character. I know that uh, Scorsese is a big fan of the filmmaker David Powell. David Powell, when he did fantasy scenes, shot them to look exactly like reality scenes. And in this movie, we're seeing, because Rupert can't distinguish between reality and fantasy, we, the viewer, normally can't distinguish between a fake scene in his head and a real scene in the movie. But when we're looking at the TV, it's actually really one of the few times where there's a very unique visual component that lets us know, real or not, this is the world of TV. And clearly, the world of TV, metaphorically speaking, is the place that Rupert wants to escape to. And it's the magical world.
Well, one of the interesting things about this movie is that, and maybe I'm misremembering, but I think that when they go to the TV stuff, now when you see a lot of movies and TV shows when they're trying to show you what happened on the TV show last night, they will show the actual footage from the TV show and then they'll cut to like the behind the scenes, like some other angle that the audience watching the show didn't see. Like you'll see that in the movie Joker, which we'll talk about in part 2. But in King of Comedy, they don't do that, right? Scorsese doesn't do that. It's just all.
He never goes back. I mean, we do see the offices. We see a little of the backstage later in the film, but
while they're showing while he's depicting what's on the show, they don't show another angle. They only show what the TV audience saw.
Absolutely, until we get to the third act when he's walking on the set. But I guess that's, in a sense, the shift in that moment is the shift because we shift perspective, because when we get to the third act, and here comes spoilers. So
well,
now,
they still don't do it in the third act, Chris, if I remember right, because they show him, in real life, they show him walking on the set and talking to people on set, but then when they get to the actual what's going on in the show,
you're right. You're absolutely right.
Then it's
absolutely
the show.
Yes, absolutely.
I mean, that's my point.
That's a great point. Now we're going to totally spoiler this thing. So Jerry and fellow stalker Masha kidnap Jerry, hold him for ransom, so that Rupert can get on TV, get his big break, and also impress the girl Rita, who he cares for so much. Especially this happens in the aftermath of him going to Jerry's house in Connecticut with Rita, because he tells Rita that, hey, we're friends. Because he's having these fantasies that they're friends in real life. This is like one of the greatest parasocial relationship illustrations before people started using the word parasocial relationship.
Well, parasocial, I mean, if you're interested in parasocial relationships, you can listen to our show on that. I'll have to link to it now. But the whole concept came out in the 50s, wasn't it, Chris? So,
yes.
And I believe the script for this movie was written in the 60s. So
it was written in the early 70s.
Okay, so
73. I read the Wikipedia.
Okay, so I mean, when they wrote this, when they made this movie, they had the idea of parasocial relationships. I mean, I forget what my point was.
Well, the point is that in the film, there are these scenes. There's the first scene where Rupert is really sharing a cab ride with Jerry, and Jerry's actually being surprisingly polite. We find out later he's just doing it because he just wants to get rid of this guy, but he's handling him. And in fairness, having dealt with the media before, I certainly know that is not an unrealistic tack that famous people will take with you if you want something from them.
Well,
Randall, I would love to look at your script. Why don't you send it to my agent? Sounds great. We'll be in touch. I promise.
Right. Well, that's how they get rid of you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that what's great about this movie, another thing that's great about this movie is Jerry Lewis's performance, and because he has firsthand experience of dealing with this sort of thing. I mean, Pupkin and Sandra Bernhard, they think they know him, because they have this parasocial relationship with him. They think he's like their best friend, and they talk to him like he's a friend. And Pupkin imagines him as a friend.
Scene. Yeah, there's that wonderful scene where somebody wants to have him take a photo with him, or sign an autograph. Sign an autograph. Today would be get a selfie. And he says, I can't. And the woman says, I hope you get cancer. And apparently that really happened to Lewis. Lewis volunteered that entire experience and had them add it to the film. That
Right.
he didn't sign on. He is kind of known as a prick, but so I totally could see him
Well, could
not.
I just say about Lewis's performance? I wanted to say this earlier. Is yeah, I mean that's one way to look at Lewis's performance in this movie. Like he's a giant a-hole, you know. But you can see why he acts that way in this movie. I can
Absolutely.
sympathize with him
No, he
because you
is.
see that
And
there's all these
yeah,
people jumping out of the woodwork
yeah.
who feel like they're his best friend, feel like they know him, and he has no idea who these people are.
There's a wonderful monologue he gives when he's been captured to explain his situation that sounds very real. And in fairness, the advice that he and even his associate producer, played by the remarkable Shelley Hack, uh, isn't really mean. They're like, okay, this is good. You have you done clubs? No. Well, why don't you do some clubs? And here's a card, and we'll send somebody. We'll send our booker to go watch you perform. By the way, for those of you who do know something about stand-up comedy, Randall, wouldn't you just love to go to like Jimmy Fallon's office, say, "Hey, can I get the card of your booker and invite them to my, 5 minutes at Flappers?" Oh, I'll be like, sure, absolutely, no
You
problem.
know,
We don't mind paying that guy to come and do it. Now, maybe in truth, they really weren't going to follow through, but the very fact that they were willing to listen to their tape, I mean, Jesus, how many friends do we have right now who are like submitting their packets as writers on talk shows who never even get that far?
yeah, that's the only thing I don't like about this movie is maybe it's in the script, but yeah, there is a part in the movie where Pupkin supposedly submits a tape. It's an audio tape in these days,
Yeah.
and supposedly they listen to it, the people at the show, and then they give him feedback. Um, I don't know if they actually listen to his tape. I mean, maybe they do, maybe they don't, but I think that's I wonder. I
Yeah, I feel it's hard to know whether they're being too nice and Fred DeCorvita would certainly have been able to give them advice on this because he dealt with these comics all the time and bookers all the time. This was definitely his bailiwick, but it is also possible that back in the 70s, life was just easier. I mean, it's a little prescient that when this movie was being filmed in March of that year, uh, John David Hinckley, who was a big fan of Martin Scorsese's Taxi Driver, uh, decided to assassinate Ronald Reagan to impress Jodie Foster. And then
Well,
by
see, there's a
December,
parasocial relationship right there. He feels he has a relationship with Jodie Foster, and he's gonna
yeah,
do this, and she's gonna like him
exactly,
more.
a real Travis Bickle. And then by the end of that year, Mark David Chapman, a big fan of the Beatles and John Lennon, uh, goes to New York City, originally to assassinate, I believe, Andy Warhol. Failing to do that, he assassinates John Lennon. So it is very prescient. It definitely it wasn't written with that in mind, but I will tell you, certainly having grown up in the New York City of 1981, it's not shocking. They're very keyed into the zeitgeist of the moment, and when the zeitgeist of the moment is that life was becoming increasingly more dangerous in New York City, especially the 70s still had that freewheeling 60s spirit, but by the time you get to 1981, no one is freewheeling, no one is open, and everybody's watching back. Uh, that's just actually me talking about it. And it's interesting too because you see this in Network, and then you see it again in this film, and you'll see it again next in The Joker. The contrast between poverty and urban decay, and the bright, clean affluence of television. If you look at Network, which was filmed in New York City in '75, there's quite a bit of urban decay and poverty, but these are fairly wealthy people, so it's more of a contrast of the outside world. Whereas Rupert, who lives not even in New York City, but across the river in Clifton, New Jersey, you can start seeing a certain degree of poverty and urban decay, less so much in his own life and more just in the city. By the way, guest appearance by The Clash at Street Scum. But it is something that Scorsese has really been a master of. And as everybody in this movie who's involved is a New Yorker, including Jerry Lewis and Sandra Bernhard, they do a great job of drawing a lovely contrasting line between the grit of real New York City and of working class life, and the clean lines of television and the affluence of TV, and how in many ways uh, TV of this period is almost like escapist movies of the 1930s Depression. I guess that is the point, right? Isn't that we've created a world of fantasy where he can escape to? Now, I would say that Rupert would tell you, and he's right, that he's not trying to be on TV to escape reality. He is trying to get on TV to improve his reality, because he makes a very clean, logical argument that if he appears in front of 80 million people, which is, I guess, back in 1981, not an unrealistic estimation of the viewership of The Tonight Show, that will put him in front of more people than most stand-up comics ever do in their entire history. So Rupert, it's interesting. I would argue, Randall, Rupert might be a fantasist. He's definitely a fantasist, but Rupert's not crazy. And what I mean by that is that Rupert isn't desiring to be famous for the sake of being famous. Rupert really wants to be a famous comic because he thinks he's really funny, not so confident in himself that he feels he can perform in front of anyone but his own menagerie of people. And probably, in fairness, you could argue maybe it's his desire to impress Rita as a man who is more than just I guess because Rita's not impressed with his autograph collection and sees him as a dreamer, that it is actually his desire to also win Rita over, kind of like Don Quixote to Dulcinea.
Well,
it really pushes him over to take action.
Well, you said a lot of things.
But weirdly enough, I think the decision to take action is not inherently crazy.
Well, you said a lot of things there. I mean, I think with the character of Rupert, I mean, there's a lot of people who dream about being in entertainment, and like Andy Kaufman, for instance, he was originally considered for the role of Rupert, and he, like, I've read, I'm a big fan, and he in one of his biographies has said that Kaufman did the same thing that Rupert did. I mean, as a kid, of course, not as an adult, not as a 34-year-old man like Rupert, where he made pretend TV shows in his bedroom. But you know, that's not an unusual thing for people that aspire to be in entertainment. You know, they pretended to make TV shows. So yeah, so with the Rupert character, there's sort of like a question. You know, I had more of a question. Okay, before I started reading about parasocial relationships, I had more of a question when I first watched it, and I'm sure it puzzled audiences too in the beginning when it first came out. You know, this movie was a big flop. But I had a question of whether or not Rupert was just like an aspiring entertainer, or he was just had some kind of mental problem, you know. But you know, I guess you could say with the Rupert character, it's both. You know, he is an aspiring entertainer, but he also has a problem with having a parasocial relationship with Jerry Langford.
Well, that's actually what I'm saying, is that Rupert is both crazy and right. Or he's not crazy. He's a fantasist, but he's not crazy, meaning and it's funny too, because even though he says he fancies himself a stand-up comic, we see him just reenacting talk shows, which is very funny because he interviews Liza Minnelli, a cutout of Liza Minnelli. And he and Liza Minnelli had been in a Martin Scorsese film together called New York, New York, just a few years earlier. So that was...
She's actually in this movie, but just as a cutout. But she's in this movie. There's a deleted scene, I guess, when she's on a talk show. It's on IMDb Trivia, but
I'd love to see it.
And her name is also in the credits. I remember I watched the credits yesterday, and her name's there, and I'm like, her name's in the credits because of a cardboard cutout.
That's what I thought. But that's my point, is this, that I would argue that Rupert is maddeningly ambitious, and because he's madly ambitious, unlike, say, what's the name of the character in Network?
Which character are you talking about?
The Peter Finch character.
The mad as hell guy?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't know his name. I forget now.
Yeah, I should have really done my research before. Hey,
well, what about
whatever. You know, it happens. We're human beings. We're not working from a script today. So anyway, that man was crazy. Wow. Really can't remember his name. Anyway, he was crazy, and I think the difference is that Rupert is lonely and has strong fantasies, and like a lot of parasocial relationships, it's an indulgence. He
Well,
indulges in these dreams to counterweight. But here's my point, which is he's maddeningly ambitious. He is so ambitious he goes to the darkest place, and he's rewarded for it. And while I don't believe it was made too early to really be a criticism of the Reagan 80s. It is by default such a beautiful uh, crystallization of the ethos of the Reagan 80s that success by any means necessary. There isn't that much of a line between Rupert Pupkin and Patrick Bateman of
yeah, I know when this movie came
of
out.
American Psycho.
Okay, yeah, I know when this movie came out, there was like a lot of reading of it that way. I don't know, I just don't see it that way. But
Oh, I do, and it's not when it came out. I mean, I read it that way because I lived in that time, and even though technically speaking, people were not happy with it, I honestly, really viciously believe that Rupert's success is very much an indictment of the capitalist system of the fact that he succeeds in the end, though there is some debate that he doesn't really succeed and it's all happening in the end. But I disagree.
I think it is a fantasy. I'm on the fantasy side of the debate.
Okay, well, I'm on the reality side that what they're really saying is that in order to really be a successful person, in order to really just get what you want, and he even says that at some point, he says it early on in the film that you have to, Howard Beale, by the name, the character we're talking about, Network, in order to get what you want, you have to be able to do whatever it takes. And
Well, that's true. That's always been true.
The difference between Travis Bickle and what's going to be discussed even in the next film, The Joker, is that I really do believe that Rupert is fueled by a maddening ambition to do whatever it takes. And we judge him poorly while he's failing, but we judge him well once he succeeds. So much so that when he gets his own show, they keep on shouting, Rupert, 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 that he says nothing. It's this very interesting, almost messianic ending where he doesn't have to speak anymore. He just is. He has become iconicized, and and the audience just chants him like a new god. So he has ascended from being a less than figure to being a godlike figure through this very dark tale, which is
All
what I
right.
love about this movie.
Well, I just want.
No, you very much negate the very reason why I thought we should discuss the film. So,
What do you mean?
well, that this is really a film about what it takes to succeed, and that only a person devoid of morals, only a person who's a fantasist, only someone who's really willing to be that insane is going to succeed. And in fact, you could almost argue that the Jerry Lewis character could have started out like the Rupert Pupkin character. We'll never know what dark things were done to get him to the place he is now.
Well,
But I really like that. That's kind of how I view the film, and I definitely think it's open to that interpretation.
okay, yeah, I can see that, but I think the ending. Well, there's a question of whether the taxi driver ending too is a fantasy or not. I mean, I don't know. I always thought the taxi driver ending was real, and then people started saying it was a fantasy.
Right, and that they're different films, but they're both.
But let me.
socially-
Okay, but also there's I think there's other movies that are more interesting where they explore the idea of ends justifies the means. So you're talking about like All About Eve, and you're talking about swimming with sharks.
Well, but say there's other movies negates the point. The point is that this story, the moral of this story, to the degree there is a moral, I would argue, is that this kind of sick society that treats celebrities as greater than and those who fail as lesser than, the only thing you can do is negate morality to get your ahead at any means necessary, so
Well,
that you can go from being a less than to a greater than. And that I really do feel is the journey of Travis Bickle, and I'm sorry, the journey of Rupert Pupkin, and kind of really where the story lends itself to. That such famous people willing
okay, all right.
to indict themselves is very humorous.
All right, I just don't see these movies, either of them, that way, Taxi Driver or King of Comedy, because I don't believe these characters are working towards the goals that they achieve at the end of these movies.
They absolutely are. They constantly are making choices that will get them to the place that they need to be.
All right, I just don't see it that way.
So
But I want to
if
say
you
about
saw the
Rupert.
film- Yeah.
Okay, I just don't see it that way, Chris. I just want to say about Pupkin's personality, though, about the blending of fantasy and reality in his head, and the blending of fantasy and reality in the movie. I think from a psychological perspective, most people have some degree of delusion. I mean, I think everybody has some degree of delusion. I mean, I think that's like true from a psychological perspective. And so, with Pupkin's character, that's one of the more fascinating things about this movie is from Pupkin's character. It's hard to see where the fantasy ends and the reality begins, right? I mean, he does seem to create a relationship between him and Langford. I mean, as tenuous as it is, he does achieve that, and
that's why I think it is about his ambition. But certainly, if we are to just say that it all occurs in his head, then that what you were saying would validate that.
I have a different point here, Chris. Is that there is a blending, like for most of us, there is a blending of fantasy and reality in his head, and the fantasy is helping him develop the reality, make the reality true. Like for instance, I mean, if you look at the whole arc of the movie, like what you're saying, he wants to be a successful TV comic, and so he achieves that goal in the movie, okay, by fantasizing the goal. He starts with a fantasy, but he makes it real because he imagines he has a relationship with Langford. He imagines he's just going to ask Langford to be on the show, and then Langford's going to put him on the show, and that's literally what happens. I mean, it's
he read
not
The Secret,
huh?
I said it's because he read The Secret.
Yeah, I read The Secret. But
That's all. He just got an advanced copy of The Secret and learned the power of positive visualization to achieving your goals.
Right. Well, exactly. I mean, but in a certain sense, it's like, well, that's what they say, in a lot of, like, if you were a lot of career coaches or life coaches, they might say that, you need to create goals and then you need to go after the goals. I mean, what are you doing when you're creating goals? You're creating fantasies in your head. You're creating a fantasy that you could do something, achieve something, and then you make it real. I mean, the line between fantasy and reality is blurry. I mean, and it almost needs to be for you to move forward. So I mean that. Anyway.
No, I'm listening. I would say that again. There's an old saying, and I really want to it's by William Carlos Williams, and I think it really kind of just sums up my feeling about the film and what's going on here. And that is, it's called The Pure Product of America, and in which he says, let me find the line here. But anyway, it is the pure product of American society that could make one corrupt. So
say that again. I couldn't hear you.
I'm not going to get the phrasing correctly, but basically what I'm trying to say is that the media of this world has its own insanity, and it therefore creates its own sickness and then feeds upon it. There's a symbiotic relationship between viewer and audience, between viewer and performer, and it's interesting that when the roles get switched, because the movie ends with Jerry Langford watching Rupert on the TV looking enraged. He's been displaced in power, quite literally, since we can imagine, because that scene actually is one of the few scenes which that scene is great because it doesn't take place in Jerry's head. I'm sorry, in Rupert's head. That's an actual fact scene. That's a scene where Jerry must contend with the fact that he's been usurped. And that is, again, kind of like what we were dealing with Network, where how people vie for and keep and fight to maintain their power in our society, which is very obsessed with that. And that's about all I can really say at this point. So to our 80 million fans, thank you for making us the most popular podcast in America and the world, making it so hard for Randall and I to walk down the street. without even, everyone stops us. It's terrible. So I just want to let you know, please, we want to hear from you. We definitely want to hear what you think about this. I hope you see the movie or you've seen the movie, but no. If you walk down the street, please don't ask me for my autograph or a selfie because I'm not going to do it. How about you, Randall?
Yeah,
Any last
yeah,
words?
I'll do it. But I just want to say before we go, Sandra Bernhard is great in this movie. I guess she improvised most of her lines. I mean, she
She's
used to be one of
great.
my favorite actresses, but
Kelly
I guess she
Hack
didn't.
is great. I met her around the same time. She lived right in the neighborhood when they filmed it. She must have gone home for lunch during her breaks, but a lovely woman and a very strong actress who does a great job. The one who plays his girlfriend was his wife at the time, and she was wonderful too. But she had been continuing to work. A lot of great performances by women in this movie that is so much about kings. Uh, all right, well, I'm Chris,
I'm Randall.
and we'll pick this up in the next episode. Bye.
All right, bye.